Okay. Chapter 43. To Will, the palm of the hand that drifted up was like a moon rising, but it was the fiery blue-inked portrait of himself. Jim, too, saw a hand before his face. His own picture looked back at him from the palm. The hand with Will's picture grabbed Will. The hand with Jim's picture grabbed Jim. Shrieks and yells. The illustrated man heaved. Twisting, he jumped to the floor. The boys, kicking, yelling, fell with him. They landed on their feet, toppled, collapsed, beheld, reared, set right, fistfuls of their shirts in Mr. Dark's fists. "Jim," he yelled. "Will! What were you doing up there, boys? Surely not reading." "Dad! Mr. Holloway!" Will's father stepped from the dark. The illustrated man rearranged the boys tenderly under one arm like kindling, then gazed with genteel curiosity at Charles Holloway, and reached for him. Will's father struck one blow before his left, was seized, held, squeezed. As the boys watched, shouting, they saw Charles Holloway gasp and fall to one knee. Mr. Dark squeezed that left hand harder, and doing this slowly, certainly, pressured the boys with his other arm, crushing their ribs so air gushed from their mouths. Night spiraled in fiery whores like great thumbprints before Will's eyes. Will's father, groaning, sank to both knees, flailing his right arm. "Damn you!" "But," said the carnival owner quietly, "I am already." "Damn you! Damn you!" "Not words, old man," said Mr. Dark. "Not words in books, nor words you say, but real thoughts, real actions. Quick thought, quick action, win the day. So," he gave one last mighty clench of his fist. The boys heard Charles Holloway's finger bones crack. He gave one last cry, and fell senseless. In one motion like a solemn pavane, the illustrated man rounded the stacks, the boys, kicking books from shelves under his arms. Will, feeling walls, books, floors fly by, foolishly thought, pressed close, why, Mr. Dark smells like calliope steam. Both boys were dropped suddenly. Before they could move or regain their breath, each was gripped by the hair on their head and roused marionettes wise to face a window, street. "Boys, you read Dickens," Mr. Dark whispered. "Critics hate his coincidences, but we know, don't we? Life's all coincidence. Turn death, and happenstance flakes off him like fleas from a killed ox. Look!" Both boys writhed in the Iron Maiden clutch of hungry saurians and bristly apes. Will did not know whether to weep with joy or new despair. Below, across the avenue, passing from church, going home, was his mother, and Jim's mother. Not on the carousel, not old, crazy, dead in jail, but freshly out in the good October air. She had been not 100 yards away in church during all the last 5 minutes. "Mom!" screamed Will against the hand which, anticipating his cry, clamped tight to his mouth. "Mom," crooed Mr. Dark mockingly, "come save me." "No," thought Will, "save yourself, run." But his mother and Jim's mother simply strolled content from the warm church through town. "Mom!" screamed Will again, and some small muffled bleat of it escaped the sweaty paw. Will's mother, 1,000 miles away over on that sidewalk, paused. She couldn't have heard, thought Will, yet she looked over at the library. "Good," sighed Mr. Dark. "Excellent. Fine." "Here," thought Will, "see us, Mom. Run, call the police." "Why doesn't she look at this window?" asked Mr. Dark quietly, "and see us three standing, as for a portrait. Look over, then come running. We'll let her in." Will strangled a sob. No, no. His mother's gaze trailed from the front entrance to the first-floor windows. "Here," said Mr. Dark. "Second floor, a proper coincidence. Let's make it proper." Now Jim's mother was talking. Both women stood together at the curb. No, thought Will, oh no. And the women turned and went away into the Sunday night town. Will felt the illustrated man slump the tiniest bit. Not much of a coincidence. No crisis. No one lost or saved. Pity. Well, dragging the boy's feet, he glided down to open the front door. Someone waited in the shadows. A lizard hand scurried cold on Will's chin. Holloway, husked the witch's voice. A chameleon perched on Jim's nose. Nightshade, whisked the dry broom voice. Behind her stood the dwarf and the skeleton, silent, shifting, apprehensive. Obedient to the occasion, the boys would have given their best stored yells air, but again, on the instant recognizing their need, the illustrated man trapped the sound before it could issue forth, then nodded curtly to the old dust woman. The witch toppled forth with her seamed black wax sewn shut iguana eyelids, and her great proboscis with the nostrils caked like tobacco-blackened pipe bowls, her fingers tracing, weaving a silent plinth of symbols on the mind. The boys stared. Her fingernails fluttered, darted, feathered cold winter water air. Her prickled green frog's breath crawled their flesh in pimples as she sang softly, mewing, humming, glistering, her babes, her boys, her friends of the slick snail-track roof. The straight-flung arrow, the stricken and sky-drowned balloon. Darning needle dragonfly, sew up these mouths so they not speak. Touch, sew, her thumbnail stabbed, punched, drew, stabbed, punched, drew along their lower upper lips until they were thread pouch shut with invisible thread. Darning needle dragonfly, sew up these ears so they not hear. Cold sand funneled Will's ears, burying her voice, muffled, far away, fading. She chanted on the rustle, tick, tickle, tap, flourish of caliper hands. Moss grew in Jim's ears, swiftly sealing him deep. Darning needle dragonfly, sew up these eyes so they not see. Her white-hot fingertips rolled back their stricken eyeballs, who'd throw the lids down with bangs like great tin doors slammed shut. Will saw a billion flashbulbs explode, then suck into darkness, while the unseen darning needle insect out beyond somewhere pranced and fizzed like insect drawn to sun-warmed honeypot. His closeted voice stitched off their senses forever and a day beyond. Darning needle dragonfly, have done with eye, ear, lip and tooth, finished hem, so dark mold dust. Heap with slumber sleep, now tie all knots ever so neat. Plump silence in blood like sand in river deep. So. The witch, somewhere outside, lowered her hands. The boys stood silent. The illustrated man took his embrace from them and stepped back. The woman from the dust sniffed at her twin triumphs, ran her hand a last loving time over her statues. The dwarf toddled mattily about the boys. Shadows. The dwarf toddled mattily about in the boys' shadows, nibbling daintily at their fingernails, softly calling their names. The illustrated man nodded toward the library. The janitor's clock. Stop it. The witch, mouth wide, savoring doom, wandered off into the marble quarry. Mr. Dark said, "Left, right, 1, 2. The boys walked down the steps, the dwarf at Jim's side, the skeleton at Will's. Serena's death, the illustrated man followed. Chapter 44. Somewhere near, Charles Holloway's hand lay in a white, hot furnace, melted to sheer nerve and pain. He opened his eyes. At the same moment he heard a great breath as the front door swung shut. A woman's voice came singing in the hall. Old man, old man, old man, old man. Where his left hand should be was this swelled blood pudding which pulsed with such ecstasies of pain it fed forth his life, his will, his whole attention. He tried to sit up, but the pain hammer-blowed him down again. Old man. Not old. 54 is not old, he thought wildly. And here she came on the worn stone floors, her moth fingers tapping, scanning braille book titles as her nostrils siphoned the shadows. Charles Holloway hunched and crawled toward the nearest stack, cramming back pain with his tongue. Yes, Gulliver. I mean, if you want. I'm serious, you sat on the other couch all day today. Could have cuddled at any time. Only now does he care. Are you done? I don't understand, Tim. Cats are weird. Charles Holloway hunched and crawled toward the nearest stack, cramming pain back with his tongue. He must climb out of reach, climb where books might be weapons flung down upon any night-crawling pursuer. Old man, I hear you breathing. She drifted on his tide, let her body be summoned by every sibilant hiss of his pain. Old man, I feel your hurt. If he could fling the pain out the window, where it might lie beating like a heart, summoning her away, tricked to go seek this awful fire. Bent in the street, he imagined her brisking her palms at this throb, an abandoned chunk of delirium. But no. The hand stayed, glowed, poisoned the air, hurrying the strange nun-gypsy's tread as she gasped her avaricious mouth with most ardently. Damn you, he cried. Get it over with. I'm here. So the witch wheeled, swift as a black-clothed dummy on rubber floors, and swayed over him. He did not even look at her. Such weights and pressures of despair and exertion fought for his attention. He could only free his eyes to watch the inside of his lids, upon which multiple and ever-changing looms of terror jagged and gamboled. Very simple, the whisper bent low. Stop the heart. Why not? He thought vaguely. Slow, she murmured. Yes, he thought. Slow, very slow. His heart, once bolting, now fell away to a strange, diseased disquiet, then quiet, then ease. Much more slow, she suggested. Tired, yes. You hear that, heart? He wondered. His heart heard. Like a tight fist, it began to relax, a finger at a time. Stop all for good. Forget all for good, she whispered. Well, why not? Slower, slowest. His heart stumbled. And then, for no reason, save perhaps for a last look around, because he did want to get rid of the pain, and sleep was the way to do that. Charles Holloway opened his eyes. He saw the witch. He saw her fingers working at the air, his face, his body, the heart within his body, and the soul within the heart. Her swamp breath flooded him while, with immense curiosity, he watched the poisonous drizzle from her lips, counted the folds in her stitch-wrinkled eyes, the Gia monster neck, the mummy-linen ears, the dry, river sand brow. Never in his life had he focused so nearly to a person, as if she were a puzzle which, once touched together, might show life's greatest secret. The solution was in her. It would all spring clear this moment. No, the next. No, the next. Watch her scorpion fingers. Hear her chant as she diddled the air. Yes, diddled it was. Tickling. Slow, she whispered. Slow. And his obedient heart pulled rein. Diddle tickle went her fingers. Charles Holloway snorted. Faintly, he giggled. He caught this. Why? Why am I giggling at such a time? The witch pulled back the merest quarter of an inch, as if some strange but hidden electrical light socket, touched with wet whirl, gave shock. Charles Holloway saw but did not see her flinch, sensed but also seemed in no way to consider her withdrawal, for almost immediately seizing the initiative, she flung herself forward, not touching but merely gesticulating at his chest, as one might try to spell an antique clock pendulum. Slow! She cried. Senselessly, he permitted an idiot smile to balloon itself up from somewhere, to attach itself with careless ease under his nose. Slowest! Her new fever, her anxiety, which changed itself to anger, was even more of a toy to him. And part of his attention, secret until now, leaned forward to scan every pore of her Halloween face. Somehow, irresistibly, the prime thing was... nothing mattered. Life in the end seemed a prank of such size you could only stand off at this end of the corridor to note its meaningless length and its quite unnecessary height. A mountain built to such ridiculous immensities, you were dwarfed in its shadow and mocking of its pomp. So with death this near, he thought numbly but purely upon a billion vanities, arrivals, departures, idiot excuses of a boy, man, and old man goat. He had gathered and stacked all manners of foibles, devices, playthings of his egotism, and now, between all the silly corridors of books and the toys of his life swayed, none more grotesque than this thing named witch gypsy reader of dust, tickling, that's what, just tickling the air. Fool, didn't she know what she was doing? He opened his mouth. Of itself, like a child born of an unsuspecting parent, one single raw laugh broke free. The witch swooned back. Charles Holloway did not see. He was far too busy letting the joke rush through his fingers, letting hilarity spring forth of its own volition along his throat, his eyes squeezed shut where it flew, whipping shrapnel in all directions. "You!" he cried, to no one, to everyone, himself, her, them, it, all. "Funny, you!" "No!" the witch protested. "Stop tickling!" he gasped. "Not!" She lunged back frantically. "Not! Sleep! Slow! Very slow!" "No, tickling is all it is, for sure!" he roared. "Ha ha! Stop!" "Yes, stop, heart!" she squealed. "Stop, blood!" Her own heart must have shaken like a tambourine. Her hands shook. In mid-gesticulation, she froze and became aware of the silly fingers. "Oh my God!" he wept beautiful, glad tears. "Get off my ribs! Oh, go on, my heart!" "Your heart! Yes! God!" He wiped his eyes wide. He popped his eyes wide, gulped air, released some more soap and water, washing everything clear, incredibly clean. "Toys! The key sticks out your back! Who wound you up?" And the largest roar of all, flung at the woman, burnt her hands, seared her face, or so it seemed, for she seized herself as from a blast furnace, wrapped her fried eggs in Egyptian rags, gripped her dry dugs, skipped back, gave pause, then started a slow retreat, nudged, pushed, pummeled inch by inch, foot by foot, clattering book racks, shelves, fumbling for handholds on volumes that thrashed free as she scrambled them down. Her brow knocked dim, history's vain theories, doomed up time, promised but compromised years, chased, bruised, beaten by his laugh, which echoed, rang, swam to fill the marble vaults. She whirled at last, claws razoring the wind air, and fled, to fall downstairs. Moments later, she managed to cram herself through the front door, which slammed. Her fall, the door slam, almost broke his frame with laughter. "Oh, God, please stop yourself," he begged of his hilarity. And thus begged, his humor let be. In mid-roar at last all faded to honest laughter, pleasant chuckling, faint giggling, then softly and with great contentment receiving and giving breath, shaking his happy, weary head, the good ache of action in his throat and ribs gone from his crumpled hand. He lay against the stacks, head leaned to some dear befriending book, the tears of releaseful mirth salting his cheeks, and suddenly knew her gone. Why, he wondered. What did I do? With one last bark of mirth, he rose up, slow. What's happened? Oh God, let's get it clear. First the drugstore, half dozen aspirin to cure this hand for an hour, then think. In the last 5 minutes you did win something, didn't you? What's victory taste like? Think. Try to remember. And smiling a new smile at the ridiculous dead animal left hand nestled in his right crooked elbow, he hurried down the night corridors and out into town. Ooh, we've made it to part 3, departures. Chapter 45. The small parade moved, soundless, past the eternally revolving, ending but unending candy serpentine of Mr. Cressetti's barber pole. past all the darkening or darkened shops, the emptying streets, for people were home now from the church suppers, or out at the carnival for the last sideshow, or the last high ladder diver floating like milkweed down the night. Will's feet, far away below, clubbed the sidewalk. 1, 2, he thought. Someone tells me left, right. Dragonfly whispers, 1, 2. Is Jim in the parade? Will's eyes flickered the briefest to one side. Yes, but who's the other little one? The gone mad, everything's so interesting, so touch it, everything's red hot, pull back. Dwarf! Plus the skeleton. And then behind, who were all those hundreds, no, thousands of people marching along, breathing down his neck? The illustrated man. Will nodded and whined so high and silently that only dogs who were no help, dogs who could not speak, might hear. And sure enough, looking obediently over, he saw not 1, not 2, but 3 dogs who, smelling the occasion, their own parade, now ran ahead, now fell behind, their tails like Gideons for the Gideons? For the platoon. Bark, thought Will. Like in the movies, bark, bring the police. But the dogs just smiled and trotted. Coincidence, please, thought Will. Just a small one. Mr. Tetley, yes! Will saw but did not see Mr. Tetley, rolling the wooden Indian back into his shop, closing for the night. Turn heads, murmured the illustrated man. Jim turned his head. Will turned his head. Mr. Tetley smiled. Smile, murmured Mr. Dark. The 2 boys smiled. Hello, said Mr. Tetley. Say hello, someone whispered. Hello, said Jim. Hello, said Will. The dogs barked. A free ride at the carnival, murmured Mr. Dark. Free ride, said Will. At the carnival, clacked Jim. Then, like good machines, they shut up their smiles. Have fun, called Mr. Tetley. The dogs barked joy. The parade marched on. Fun, said Mr. Dark. Free rides. When the crowds go home, half an hour from now, we'll ride Jim around. You still want that, Jim? Hearing but not hearing, locked away in himself, Will thought, Jim, don't listen. Jim's eyes slid, wet or oily, it was hard to tell. You'll travel with us, Jim. And if Mr. Cougar doesn't survive, it's a near thing for him, we haven't saved him yet, we'll try again now. But if he doesn't make it, Jim, how would you like to be partners? I'll grow you to a fine, strong age, 22, 25? Dark and nightshade. Nightshade and dark. Sweet, lovely names for such as we, with such as the sideshows to run around the world. What say, Jim? Jim said nothing, sewn up in the witch's dream. Don't listen, wailed his best friend, who heard nothing, but heard it all. And Will, said Mr. Dark. Let's ride him back and back, Make him a babe in arms, a babe for the dwarf to carry around like a clown child, round about in parades, every day for the next 50 years. Would you like that, Will? To be a babe forever, not able to talk and tell all the lovely things you know? Yes, I think that's best for Will. A playful, a little wet friend for the dwarf. I swear to you, my windows are closed. My neighbors just own really loud machines. Will must have screamed, but not out loud, for only the dogs barked in terror, yipping off as they ran, as if pelted with rocks. A man came around the corner. A policeman. Who's this? Muttered Mr. Dark. Mr. Kolb, said Jim. Mr. Kolb, said Will. Darning needle, whispered Mr. Dark. Dragonfly. Pain stabbed Will's ears, moss stuffed his eyes, gum glued his teeth. He felt a multitudinous tapping, shutting, weaving about his face, all numb again. Say hello to Mr. Kolb. Hello, said Jim. Kolb, said the dreaming Will. Hello, boys, gentlemen. Turn here, said Mr. Dark. They turned. Away toward the meadow country, away from warm lights, good town, safe streets, the drumless march progressed. Chapter 46. Stretched out over a mile of territory, the strangling parade now moved as follows. At the edge of the carnival midway, stumping the grass with their dead feet, Jim and Will paced friends who constantly retold the wondrous uses of darning needle dragonflies. Behind, a good half-mile, trying to catch up, walking mysteriously wounded, the gypsy, who whirl-cymbaled the dust. And further back yet came the janitor father, now slowing himself with remembrances of age, now pacing swiftly, young with thoughts of the brief first encounter and victory, carrying his left hand padded to his chest, chewing medicines as he went. At the midway rim, Mr. Dark looked back as if an inner voice had named the stragglers in his widely separated maneuver, but the voice failed. He was unsure. He nodded briskly, and dwarf skeleton Jim and Will thrust through the crowd. Jim felt the river of bright people wash by all around but not touching. Will heard waterfall, laughter here, there, and around him, walking through the downpour, an explosion of fireflies blossomed on the sky. The Ferris wheel, exultant as a titanic fireworks, dilated above them. Then they were at the mirror maze, and sidling, colliding, bumping, careening through the unfolded ice ponds were stricken, spider-stung boys, much like themselves, appeared, vanished 1,000 times over. "That's me," thought Jim. "But I can't help me," thought Will, "no matter how many of me there are." A crowd of boys, plus crowd of reflected Mr. Dark's illustrations, for he had taken off his coat and shirt now, crammed and crushed through to the waxworks at the end of the maze. "Sit," said Mr. Dark. "Stay." Among the wax figures of murdered, gunshot, guillotined, garroted men and women, the two boys sat like Egyptian cats, unblinked, untwitched, unswallowing. Some late visitors passed through, laughing. They commented on all the wax figures. They did not notice the thin line of saliva crept from the corner of one wax boy's mouth. They did not see how bright the second wax boy's stare was, which suddenly brimmed and ran clear down his cheek. Outside, the witch limped in through back alleys of rope and peg between the tents. "Ladies and gentlemen," the last crowd of the night, 300 or 400 strong, turned as a body. The illustrated man, stripped to the waist, all nightmare viper, saber-tooth, libidinous ape, clotted vulture, all salmon sulphur sky, rose up with annunciations. "The last free event of this evening. Come one, come all." The crowd surged toward the main platform, outside the freak tent where stood Dwarf, Skeleton, and Mr. Dark. "The most amazingly dangerous, oft-times fatal, world-famous bullet trick." The crowd gasped with pleasure. "The rifles, if you please." The thin one cracked wide a rack display of bright artillery. The witch, hurrying up, froze when Mr. Dark cried, "And here, our death defier, the bullet catcher who will stake her life, Mademoiselle Tarot." The witch shook her head, bleated, but Dark's hand swept down to swing her like a child to the platform, still protesting, which gave Dark pause, but in front of everyone he went on. "A volunteer, please, to fire the rifle." The crowd mumbled softly, daring itself to speak up. Mr. Dark's mouth barely moved. Under his breath he asked, "Is the clock stopped?" "Not," she whined. "Stopped." "No?" he almost burst out. He burnt her with his eyes, then turned to the audience and let his mouth finish the spiel, his fingers rapping over the rifles. "Volunteers, please." "Stop the act," the witch cried softly, wringing her hands. "It goes on, damn you, worse than double damn you," he whistled fiercely. Secretly, Dark gathered a pinch of flesh in his wrist, the illustrations of a black nun blind woman, which he bit with his fingernails. The witch spasmed, seized her breast, ground her teeth. "Mercy!" she hissed, half out loud. Silence from the crowd. Mr. Dark nodded swiftly. "Since there are no volunteers," he scraped his illustrated wrist. The witch shuddered. "We will cancel our last act and—" Here! A volunteer! The crowd turned. Mr. Dark recoiled and asked, Where? Here. Far out at the edge of the crowd, a hand lifted. A path opened. Mr. Dark could see very clearly the man standing there, alone. Charles Holloway, citizen, father, introspective husband, night wanderer, and janitor of the town library. Chapter 47. Eventually I will have a desk where I can actually have things that make sense, not position-wise. Anyway. The crowd's appreciative clamor faded. Charles Holloway did not move. He let the path grow, leading down to the platform. He could not see the expression on the faces of the freaks standing up there. His eyes swept the crowd and found the mere maze, the empty oblivion which beckoned with 10 times 1,000 million light-years of reflections, counter-reflections, reversed and double-reversed, plunging deep to nothing, face falling to nothing, stomach dropping away to yet more sickening plummets of nothing. And yet wasn't there an echo of 2 boys in the powdered silver at the back of each glass? Did or did not he perceive with tremulous tip of eyelash, if not eye, their passage through, their weight beyond, warm wax against cold, waiting to be key-wound by terrors run free in panics? No, thought Charles Holloway. Don't think. Get on with this. Coming, he shouted. Go get 'em, Pop, a man said. Yes, said Charles Holloway. I will. And he walked down through the crowd. The witch spun slowly, magnetized, at the night-wandering volunteer's approach. Her eyelids jerked at their sewn black wax threads beyond dark glasses. Mr. Dark, the illustration-drenched, super-infested civilization of souls, leaned from the platform, gladly wetted his lips. Thought spun fiery Catherine wheels in his eyes. Quick, what? And the aging janitor, fixing a smile to his face like a white celluloid of teeth from a crackerjack box, strode on. And the crowd opened as the sea before Moses and closed behind, and him wondering what to do. Why was he here? But on the move, steadily, nonetheless. Charles Holloway's foot touched the first step of the platform. The witch trembled secretly. Mr. Dark felt the secret, glanced sharply. Swiftly he put his hand out to grab for the good right hand of this 54-year-old man. But the 54-year-old man shook his head. He would not give his hand to be held, touched, or helped up. Thanks. No. On the platform, Charles Holloway waved to the crowd. The people set off a few firecrackers of applause. But, Mr. Dark was amazed, your left hand, sir. You can't hold and fire a rifle if you only have use of one hand. Charles Holloway paled. I'll do it, he said, with one hand. Hurrah! cried a boy below. Go it, Charlie, a man called out beyond. Mr. Dark flushed as the crowd laughed and applauded, even louder now. He lifted his hands to ward off the wave of refreshing sound like rain that washed in from the people. All right, let's see if he can do it. Brutally, the illustrated man snapped a rifle from its locks and hurled it through the air. The crowd gasped. Charles Holloway ducked. He put up his right hand. The rifle slapped his palm. He grabbed it. It did not fall. He had it good. The audience hooted, said things against Mr. Dark's bad manners which made him turn away for a moment, damning himself silently. His father lifted the rifle, beaming. The crowd roared. And while the wave of applause came in, crashed, and went back down to shore, he looked again to the maze, where the sensed but unseen shadow shapes of Will and Jim were filed among titanic razor blades of revelation and illusion, then back to the Medusa gaze of Mr. Dark, swiftly reckoned with, and onto the stitched and jittering sightless nun of midnight, sidling back still more. Now she was as far as she could sidle, at the far end of the platform, almost pressed to the whorled red-black rifle bull's-eye target. Boy, shouted Charles Holloway. Mr. Dark stiffened. "I need a boy volunteer to help me hold the rifle," shouted Charles Holloway. "Someone! Anyone!" he shouted. A few boys in the crowd shifted around on their toes. "Boy!" shouted Charles Holloway. "Hold on, my son's out there. He'll volunteer. Won't you? Won't you, Will?" The witch flung one hand up to feel the shape of this audacity which came off of the 54-year-old man like a fever. Mr. Dark was spun around as if hit by a fast-traveling gunshot. "Will!" called his father. In the wax museum, Will sat motionless. "Will!" called his father. "Come on, boy!" The crowd looked left, looked right, looked back. No answer. Will sat in the wax museum. Mr. Dark observed all this with some respect, some degree of admiration, some concern. He seemed to be waiting, just as was Will's father. "Will, come help your old man," Mr. Holloway cried jovially. Will sat in the wax museum. Mr. Dark smiled. Willie, come here." No answer. Mr. Dark smiled more. "Willie, don't you hear your old man?" Mr. Dark stopped smiling. For this last was the voice of a gentleman in the crowd speaking up. The crowd laughed. "Will!" called a woman. "Willie!" called another. "Yoo-hoo!" a gentleman in a beard. "Come on, William!" a boy. The crowd laughed, more, jostled elbows. Charles Holloway called. They called. Charles Holloway cried to the hills. They cried to the hill. Willie! William!" Shadow shuttled and wove in the mirrors. The witch broke out, chandeliers of sweat. "There!" The crowd stopped calling, as did Charles Holloway, choked on the name of his son now, and silent. For Will stood in the entrance of the maze like the wax figure that he almost was. "Will," called his father softly. The sound of this chimed the sweat off the witch. Will moved, unseeing, through the crowd. And, handing the rifle down like a cane for the boy to grasp, his father drew him up onto the stand. "Here's my good left hand," announced the father. Will neither saw nor heard the crowd sound forth a solid and offensive applause. Mr. Dark had not moved, though Charles Holloway could see him, during all this, lighting and setting off cannon crackers in his head, but each, one by one, fizzled and died. Mr. Dark could not guess what they were up to. For that matter, Charles Holloway did not know or guess. It was as if he had written this play by himself over the years in the library nights, torn up the play after memorizing it, and now forgotten what he had set forth to remember. He was relying on secret discoveries of self, moment by moment, playing by ear, no, heart and soul. And now? "Yes, Gulliver." "You good?" "Okay." The brightness of his teeth seemed to strike the witch's blinder. Impossible! She flung one hand to her glasses, her sewn eyelids. "Closer, everyone," called Will's father. The crowd gathered in. The platform was an island. The sea was people. "Watch the bullseye target here." The witch melted in her rags. The illustrated man looked left, found no pleasure in the skeleton, who simply looked thinner, found no pleasure looking right at a dwarf who blandly dwelt in squashed idiot madness. "The bullet, please," Will's father said amiably. The 1,000 illustrations on his jerking horseflesh frame did not hear, so why should Mr. Dark? "If you please," said Mr. Holloway. "The bullet, so I may knock that flea off the old gypsy's wart." Will sat motionless. Mr. Dark hesitated. Out on the choppy sea, smiles flashed here, there, 100, 200, 300 whitenesses, as if a vast titillation of water had been provoked by a lunar gravity. The tide ebbed. The illustrated man in slow motion proffered the bullet, his arm a long molasses undulation, lays to offer the bullet to the boy to see if he would notice. He did not notice. His father took the missile. "Mark it with your initials," said Mr. Dark by rote. "No, with more." Charles Holloway raised his son's hand and made him hold the bullet, so he could take a penknife with his one good hand and carve a strange symbol on the lead. "What's happening?" Will thought. "I know what's happening. I don't know what's happening. What?" Mr. Dark saw a crescent moon on the bullet. saw nothing wrong with such a moon, rammed it in the rifle, slammed the rifle back at Will's father, who once more caught it deftly. Ready, Will? The boy's peach face drowsed with the slightest nod. Charles Holloway flicked a last glance at the maze, thought, Jim, you still there? Get ready. Mr. Dark turned to go pat, conjure, calm his dust-crowned friend, but cracked to a halt at the crack of the rifle being reopened, the bullet ejected by Will's father to ensure the audience it was there. It seemed real enough. Yet he had read long ago that this was a substitute bullet, shaped of very hard steel-colored crayon wax. Shot through the rifle, it would dissolve out the barrel as smoke and vapor. At this very moment, having somehow switched bullets, the illustrated man was slipping the real marked bullet into the witch's twitching fingers. She would hide it in her cheek. At the shot, she would pretend to jolt under the imagined impact, then reveal the bullet caught by her yellow rat teeth. Fanfare. Applause. The illustrated man, glancing up, saw Charles Holloway with opened rifle, the wax bullet, but instead of revealing what he knew, Mr. Holloway simply said, Let's cut our mark more clearly, eh, boy? And with his penknife, the boy holding the bullet in his senseless hand, he marked this fresh, new, wax, unmarked bullet with the same mysterious crescent moon, then snapped it back into the rifle. Ready? Mr. Dark looked to the witch, who hesitated, then nodded once, faintly. Ready, announced Charles Holloway. And all about lay the tents, the breathing crowd, the anxious freaks, a witch iced with hysteria, Jim, hidden to be found an ancient mummy still seated, glowing with blue fire in his electric chair, and merry-go-round waiting for the show to cease, the crowd to go, and the carnival to have its way with boys and janitor trapped, if possible, and alone. Will, said Charles Holloway conversationally as he lifted the now suddenly heavy rifle, your shoulder here is my brace. Take the middle of the rifle gently with one hand. Take it, Will. The boy raised a hand. That's it, son. When I say hold, hold your breath. Hear me? The boy's head tremored with the slightest affirmation. He slept, he dreamed. The dream was a nightmare. The nightmare was this. And the next part was his father shouting, Ladies, gentlemen. The illustrated man clenched his fist. Will's picture, lost in it, like a flower, was crushed. Will twisted, the rifle fell. Charles Holloway pretended not to notice. Me and Will here, will now, together, him being the good left arm I can't use, do the one and only, most dangerous, sometimes fatal, bullet trick. Applause, laughter. Quickly, the 54-year-old janitor, denying each year, laid the rifle back on the boy's jerking shoulder. Hear that, Will? Listen. That's for us. The boy listened. The boy grew calm. Mr. Dark tightened his fist. Will was taken with a slight palsy. We'll hit 'em bullseye on, won't we, boy? Said his father. More laughter. And the boy grew calm, very calm indeed, with the rifle on his shoulder. And Mr. Dark squeezed tight on the peach fuzz face nestled in the flesh of his hand. But the boy was serene in the laughter, which still flowed, and his father kept the whoop rolling thus. Show the lady your teeth, Will. Will showed the lady against the target his teeth. The blood fell away from the witch's face. Now Charles Holloway showed her his teeth, too, such as they were, and winter lived in the witch. Boy, said someone in the audience, she's great, acts scared, look. I'm looking, thought Will's father, his left hand useless at his side, his right hand up to the rifle trigger, his face to the sight, as his son held the rifle unswervingly pointed at the bullseye, and the witch's face superimposed there, and the last moment come, and a wax bullet in the chamber. What could a wax bullet do? A bullet that dissolved in transit. What use? Why were they here? What could they do? Silly, silly. No, thought Will's father. Stop. He stopped the doubts. He felt his mouth shape words with no sound. But the witch heard what he said. Above the dying laughter, before the warm sound was completely gone, he made these words silently with his lips. The crescent moon I have marked on the bullet is not a crescent moon. It is my own smile. I have put my smile on the bullet in the rifle. He said it once. He waited for her to understand. He said it, silently, again. And in the moment before the illustrated man himself translated the mouthings, quickly Charles Holloway cried faintly, "Hold!" Will held his breath. Far back among the wax statues, Jim hid away, dripped saliva from his chin. Strapped in an electric chair, a dead alive mummy hummed power in its teeth. Mr. Dark's illustrations writhed with sick sweat as he clenched his fist a final time, but too late. Serene, Will held his breath, held weapon. Serene, his father said, "Now," and fired the rifle. We'll do one more. Well, there's not much left. We'll finish it up fully in the next one. Like I said, it won't matter. Either we end now, or we end in one more chapter where it's still a cliffhanger. I'm sorry, that's just the way this is. So hope that was good. And yeah, we will finish it in the next video. So yeah. I should be recording that soon. Probably tomorrow, actually. So, we'll see.